Good morning. Welcome to Keys to Understanding the Middle East podcast. We're doing a live stream now on our Facebook page and also on my Periscope account. Still experimenting with that one and figuring out what's going on with it. But, there's always stuff to learn with media technology, and we're really trying to branch out and engage more on all these platforms. I hope our Facebook joiners will if they have any questions come up, they can put it in the chat and I'll do my best to get to the questions. And then otherwise, this will be, living in podcast world, and you can access it anywhere you get your podcasts. So I'm the Assistant Director of the Middle East Studies Center at Ohio State University, Melinda McClymans, and I'm here with a very important guest. He's the Director of our Institute for Population Research at Ohio State. Professor John Casterline is the Robert T. Lazarus Professor in Population Studies in our Department of Sociology. His research focuses on demography, family, and research methods. Currently, he's looking at social networks and fertility change, reproductive change in Africa, demographic change in the Arab region, causes and consequences of fertility decline. And he has a global perspective, which is super exciting because then we can put the Middle East in global perspective in our conversation. But he has actually collaborated a lot with researchers and sort of survey providers, demographic data providers in the Middle East. He worked with the Arab League, for example, and is one of the few professors that has access to that data. So it's a really unique opportunity to speak with him and engage on these topics of, pure numbers, math, statistical analysis, and, hard numbers, which is so important for teaching about the Middle East and is often a starting point for, going into the context and histories as well. So if we have time, maybe we'll touch on some histories, but mainly we're focused on the Middle East. So Dr. Casterline, is there anything else you'd like to add about yourself that the audience would like to know?
No, I think that's good background. And thanks for having me, Melinda. Thanks very much. I welcome this opportunity.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, I'm so happy to have you here, and I really appreciate you taking the time out because I know how demanding research is, and I really appreciate it, and I know our audience appreciates it, and our students. So let's start with an overview. Can you explain global demographic dynamics, like that kind of research to our audience, and then maybe go into a little more detail about low and middle income countries in the past half century?
Yeah, so it's quite a story, really. The demographics of the last, as you say, half century for low middle income countries, Latin America, Africa, Arab region, South Asia, Southeast Asia. It's been phenomenal change. And if you go back half a century, or let's go all the way back to 1950, now we've kind of lost sight of what that world was, but it was a very different world in terms of demographics, which means it was also a very different world for people's lives. In 1950, if we look at let's just say in the Middle East, throughout the Middle East, immediately post-World War II, something in the order of 30 to 40% of children didn't survive till age 5. Life expectancy at birth was around, let's say, 40 on average. A lot of that was deaths early in life, but even those who survived childhood didn't live to the ages we do now. And women on average were having on the order of 6, 7 children. Actually, in the Middle East, it was on the order of 7 children, a bit higher than the rest of the globe. But globally, that was a situation. Short life expectancies, high rates of death early in life, and large numbers of children. Well, it's an entirely different picture now. It's been 5, 6, 7 decades of phenomenal change, phenomenal decline in rates of death and rates of birth. And it's unprecedented. We believe that through most of the millennia of human existence, the situation we had around 1950, it probably prevailed. it's just what life was then, that it's not now. So so these are this is what I study, these kind of numbers, and there's I mean, I do a lot of numerical analysis that would I enjoy it, and I find it worthwhile and illuminating, but many people might find it dry. But it does pertain to stuff that's incredibly salient in all our lives. It's about marriages, births, health and death. It's stuff that's highly personal to all of us. So what we do as demographers is provide that big kind of numerical backdrop. But yeah, that's been my research career has been about this demographic change of the last set of decades in the low and middle income countries. And further thing I'll say is my own particular area of research has been childbearing, what demographers call fertility.
Okay.
And by that, we don't mean some physiological capacity. We actually mean the childbearing that occurs. So I'm particularly focused on that.
And women are having much fewer kids these days everywhere.
Yeah, it's a revolutionary change. Well, if we just look at the Middle East, I say go back 50, 60 years, and throughout the region, with a few exceptions. Lebanon, of course, has been different as far back as we can figure out. But women were on average bearing, let's say, 6 to 7 children. Now it's down below, well, it's certainly below 4 everywhere in the region on average per country. And below 3, it's down near 2 in many countries. The 2-child family is becoming the norm. So it's a phenomenal change, which with all sorts of implications for other aspects of life, certainly huge implications for women's lives. I mean, having 2 children versus 6 or 7 is an entirely different adult experience.
Yeah.
And old age experience. It's a different
yeah, I was going to say there's
experience.
People are living longer, so there's also the issue of caretaking for older family members.
Yeah, we're actually, I've just been conducting some research with some colleagues here on sort of what you're pointing at right there. How are people's lives changing, let's say, after age 40 until age 60 or 70, because of all these demographic changes I've described. So women have fewer children. They probably complete their childbearing at a younger age. So that would seem to free up a lot of years for other stuff. On the other hand, there's still old age support to deal with, your own parents, and probably raising children maybe takes more time and effort than it used to. So it's kind of a complicated calculus.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Very
complicated.
But the old age support, yes, is relevant in a way that it, well, there's 2 things. One, yes, people now are living into their 70s and 80s. For most countries in the region, the Middle East region, the methods we use, the calculated life expectancy at birth is over 70 years, 75, 80, this sort of thing. Long lives. So in the past, it would have been 10 or 15 years shorter, and there would have been 5, 6, 7 children who are potential sources of support, of assistance.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now it's down to 2. The Middle East is not different than the rest of the world, actually, but daughters are the key. If you don't have daughters, tend to do most of the work. Certainly true in Arab society, but it's actually true in our society. So that's kind of a universal.
Thank you for recognizing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of the gender equity issues are global, but you do find it to sometimes, especially if you look at the gender gap. I don't know if you've come across that. I think is it the UN who puts that out? There's it's like the UN or the World Bank or one of those global organizations puts the gender gap report out every year, and everything's that like the kind of pressures women face, like for caretaking, is everywhere, but maybe more remarkable in the Middle East. But
Gender
yeah.
gaps are, at least in statistical terms, really interesting issue for the Middle East. And maybe it's everyone who would be watching this knows, but women are well educated. Younger cohorts of women are very well educated in the Middle East now. Every Middle East society.
Yeah.
In fact, in most Middle East countries, women are staying in school longer than men. So the university educations are more common among women than men. Yet, so there in educational terms, the gender gap has been closed or even reversed, actually. But when it comes to the labor market, the labor market still leans, heavily in men's favor. It's still the case when women marry. Well, they may continue their occupation, their work, but often they don't. And household division of labor is still highly gendered. So it's an interesting mixed picture, and maybe it's transitional. Maybe the improvements in education are going to eventually convert into a different kind of family life.
Mm-hmm.
Be seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the caretaking role, I think it was more prominent in like the Biden administration here in the US just recently issued their infrastructure proposal, and they identify caretakers in there as a segment we need to do things like pay better and recognize the labor and the free labor that a lot of, not always women, because there are also men who need to be caretakers, of course, but if you look at the vast majority, it's women in every country. So yeah, that's definitely evolving, and I think like what you mentioned before about how when you have fewer children but then more older people, that creates a pressure, and Middle Eastern cultures tend to look down on like assisted living facilities and things like that. They also have them there, of course, because they're so needed, but this kind of frowned upon to put your parents in one of those.
Yeah. No, that's very undeveloped, and we'll see. It seems like inevitably there'll be more of that kind of formal care arrangements for elderly. But no, for the time being, so this is really an issue looming very quickly now, because this decline to small families that occurred over the last 30, 40 years, it is sort of recent, but it's going to kick in now that the elderly are going to increasingly be persons with just 2 or 3 children, just a small number of children. So the caretaking is going to become challenged. Now, an interesting aspect of this, I think it's still the case in Middle Eastern society that the extended family, so your cousins, or if you're an aunt and uncle, your nieces and nephews, are quite relevant in your life. There's strong connections, and so I'll say this is anecdotal. I don't have data, but what I perceive is that there's still some dedication, devotion, or loyalty of like nieces and nephews to their aunts and uncles. So I think that the assistance goes beyond just the so-called nuclear family at this point. So, and it will be interesting to see if Arab society can.
That's an interesting dimension to look at, how much the nuclear family becomes, I guess, like a independent unit, and how much it remains part of an extended family.
Yeah.
It seems like, even looking at my own family, and my Italian heritage, I grew up knowing cousins was close with my cousins, and a very strong sense of connection to the broader family, and just, yeah, more so than other, cultural communities.
Yeah. Well, I can actually point to some statistical evidence that's germane to this. The surveys that I analyze, one question they ask is, one thing they ascertain is whether the marriage is to a relative, to a cousin.
Mm-hmm.
This is consanguinity, we call it, or marriage endogamy. Well, it's common in the Middle East in a way that it's nowhere else in the world.
In today's time,
South Asia,
not in the past. In the past, it used to be much more acceptable.
Yeah, more common, but it's still, what I'm saying is it's still remarkably common.
Yeah. I mean,
it's still in the order of like 20-25% of marriages in Turkey, in Egypt, in Jordan. Marriages during the last couple decades are to a cousin. And there's this is actually not very well known, among people who.
Oh, I know. Yeah, people don't. So 25%.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. I mean, I guess I was not. I'm still formulating my thoughts about it, but yeah, I mean, even in Europe, if you look back 100 years ago,
you're
it was
right.
More, you know what I mean? It was more like a normal thing to marry a first cousin, even in the U.S.
Yes, you're exactly right. That's not very well known because now we're so detached from that. We've but now it's kind of considered kind of illicit, or not illicit, but improper.
Totally, yeah.
No. Social reasons and also maybe medical reasons, and but in the Middle East societies, it's still moderately common. Okay, it's a minority of marriages, but it's a large minority. So I'm saying that's kind of indication of an importance of the extended family that we don't have in other regions of the globe. I think, at least by that marker.
Yeah.
There is a connection among families. It's brother to brother, sister to sister, brother to sister, and their children are connected in a way that I think it's a distinctive feature that I say we can document it statistically, but the social implications must be very large and be very interesting to pursue.
Absolutely. I mean,
it could bear on support in old age too. It's not just your kids, maybe you could also have nephews and nieces that can be relevant, can be helpful.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it keeps you more intertwined, I guess, as a family, as your broader family. And I also think it could mean you're living in the same neighborhood as well, so that there's fewer logistical difficulties in like kind of sharing, more teamwork on taking care of the older people and the children.
I've thought, but I can't point to any evidence on this, but that social life in Middle Eastern societies consists more of interaction with this extended family than you would find in other parts of the world. Well, I don't know what kind of
definitely.
I don't know what evidence would prove.
I mean, in comparison to where we're coming from geographically today, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think if you go to different countries around the world, people have a different level of willingness to move for a job, for example. If due to family connections, they don't want to leave their family, whereas in other cases, people are more willing to pursue job opportunities and kind of just branch off and be their little nuclear family and be an independent unit more, and maybe hire more help for childcare or whatever it is, there's different adaptations to what you'll find.
Yeah. Labor migration is really common in the region, Middle East, but tends to be men going off to work in the Gulf or someplace, and if they're married, their wife and their children stays stays in their home community, their home neighborhood. So so moving for work, yeah, it tends to be temporary labor migration, not a permanent move, as we would know.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think the point you were making, I'm kind of agreeing with your point. I think this is correct. So
Yeah, and I mean, the economics counts too, because like you mentioned, like the Gulf tends to be a target area for people looking for jobs, maybe temporary jobs, or just sources of income, and because of the economic differences there between the Gulf and other countries in the Middle East. That's also affecting everything, really. I mean, culture. There's a lot of cultural differences within the Middle East, economic differences within the Middle East that affect how people are constructing their lives, and definitely impacting family life. I mean, if the breadwinner has to go away, I think it matters a lot how much you would have your extended family around you,
mm,
to make sure the kids remain taken care of and everything like that, and you have that support. Whereas if you're kind of an independent unit, it's kind of like the married couple is very much, I mean, in the US, a lot of times they have the dual income situation, and they're both kind of like, it's that kind of teamwork, whereas you have that versus extended family teamwork for all the caretaking. So it's very interesting how the statistics shed light on these dimensions, these really, things we kind of take for granted every day because it seems like just the way it is, but actually they change so dramatically.
the other, I mean, speaking of migration, the other factor here for the region is migration north across the Mediterranean to Europe, and that's a huge. And I have to say, I'm not all that well informed. It's not something I've studied closely, but of course, some awareness of what's going on. But that's a huge consequence for the whole region. Kind of flows back and forth to Europe. So, and that's a we call that a demographics as well. Migration is among our key demographic variables.
So that would affect demographics. How? Like, is there? Yeah.
Well, there's I mean, ultimately, there's kind of a flow of ideas, isn't there? When you have that connection, when you have family, your own household or households you're connected to that move to Europe or spend time in Europe, come back. I think there's a flow of ideas that can be quite powerful. So there's a connectivity, a kind of a integration of North Africa, Middle East with Europe that it actually goes way back historically, but in quantitative terms, it's become a lot more important in the last 20, 30 years. So this is making the region a different place, I think. So.
And making Europe.
But it's also there's also issues simply of wealth, of economic affluence, of financial affluence that comes with, well, for most people, with working in Europe. So, and I think there will be remittances. There's I mean, I think the Gulf actually is less an area for economic opportunity than it used to be, and in some ways being displaced by Europe. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think the Gulf is still a huge source of income for the whole region. But you look ahead, I think petroleum's not going to be our main source of energy forever. It's diminishing importance.
Good point. Yeah.
So,
that is a really good point. That could definitely. I think they're trying to diversify their economies. I don't want to kind of stereotype them as just, oil-rich countries, but they are, that has been a cornerstone of their economy for so long. And that could really have an impact. And then you mentioned remittances. Could you just unpack that term and talk about how that occurs when people migrate?
Well, of course, so remittance is, sending money back from back home from wherever you're working. So it particularly occurs when you have one member of the household working elsewhere, and often sacrificing their own, not living so well themselves, saving as much as they can, and sending it back through some sorts of bank channels. So, but the income boost so let's say it's a household in Egypt, and someone goes to work in the Gulf. The returning income can be a huge. It can double, triple, quadruple the household's income flow. So it's huge in financial terms. By the way, you go back a couple of decades, there were actually a lot of Egyptians working in Iraq in agriculture, kind of a different thing than we imagine. We think of the Gulf that people are working in kind of white collar or service kind of jobs, but there was Egypt itself, an agriculturally rich country, had a lot of workers, had a whole lot of men who went to Iraq and worked in agriculture. I'm not sure exactly why there was demand, why Iraq was short on agricultural labor, but I know that there were a lot of Egyptians working in agriculture in Iraq. But this goes back now some decades. So.
That's interesting. I wonder if there was more of a retention of farming skills in Egypt than Iraq. Maybe people were choosing to leave farming in Iraq. I mean, it makes sense, in terms of how the urban centers have grown so much in the Middle East. People leaving the farming life behind.
Yeah, I've never looked into it, Melinda, but I know this is true. What I said is true, that there were a fair number of agricultural workers from Egypt who were working in Iraq. Now, why there was more opportunity in Iraq than in Egypt, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious. But just going back to the global perspective, so what's distinctive about marriage patterns, like maybe other than the consanguinity that we mentioned? Are there other patterns that make the Middle East unique?
Yeah. Well, one thing is there's, and it's not true of all countries. Egypt, for example, is an exception. But there's been a marked trend the last 20, 30 years towards much later marriage of women. And, well, if you project forward, it looks like some countries, especially in North Africa, but also in Western Asia, there's going to be like substantial fractions of women who don't marry at all, on the order of 10 to 20%. So this is one of the really historic changes in the region. That's a development just of the last 20, 25 years.
Wow.
So what's behind that? Well, this has been a subject of a whole lot of demographic research. I myself have not conducted an analysis of it, but the general view is that getting married, there's strong social norms here. And you don't marry unless you have a certain amount of accumulation of resources to set up a new household. And
right.
The responsibility here lies mainly on the male side, although both families contribute at the time of marriage to the new couple, to the new household.
Mm-hmm.
But, bulk of the burden lies on the male side. It's pretty, carefully prescribed. Who's supposed to do what at the time you contract a marriage. And it's just gotten very hard for men to come up with the resources.
That reminds me.
And by the way, it seems like it's kind of one of these arms races. You've got increasingly high expectations about what you should have in hand when you start a marriage. Starting with the wedding itself. Throughout the Arab Middle East, weddings are really lavish affairs, and there's a lot of family honor in that. So, I mean, an objective observer would say it's kind of gotten out of control, but well, social life often has these kind of things, doesn't it? Things that become really quite normative, although they in some ways seem dysfunctional. So I don't want to use words that sound too condemning, but that's thought to be what's going on here is that, well, a couple of things, but one is that the cost of having a marriage has just really ramped up in comparison to the resources available. So men have trouble finding a marriageable man has become more of a challenge, or men making themselves marriageable. So for the men, it becomes later in their life, and well, you could say they could, so they're not ready to marry until they're 28 or 30 or something. Well, you could say, well, they still could marry a woman who's 18 or 20 or something, but it's kind of not the way it works. You tend to marry persons near your own age. So the upside is that for these new generations of young adults, they're getting married later and later. So, and so in global terms, some of the oldest ages at marriage globally are in the Arab region, North African Arab region.
Wow.
Not absolutely alone. East Asia, some of the same, but average ages at marriage in the late 20s or around age 30 are not so rare now, especially places like Tunisia, Lebanon. So it's quite an interesting phenomenon, and the question to be answered now is whether. So we have, if you look at persons around age 30 now, high fractions are not yet married in a number of these countries. So now the question is to be answered. I mean, not to be determined. Will they never marry? Or will they just marry at a rather older age? But of course, past age 30, pretty soon, you're going to run out of time to have children. So, which of course, it's highly valued that you have at least a few children. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that's occurring through the region.
That seems like it could.
Jury's still out on a lot of this.
Yeah, it seems like it could make the number of children continue to trend down, though, since it's harder to conceive after a certain age.
Yeah, we perform analyses. This is the kind of work I do. So we have this enormous decline in birth rates and fertility over the last 30, 40 years. And we can do we can look at the sources of that. We can attribute that decline to various kind of direct sources, and most notably marriage or use of contraception. And in the Arab region I've done this kind of analysis. The Arab region stands out as a region where where marriage has made a very large contribution to the decline in fertility, larger than other regions.
Because of the late age?
Yeah, late age, and well, I say we're heading towards high fractions, not marrying at all. But at this point, we would just say it's the later age. Yeah, it's notable region with
that
in that respect.
I mean, I remember in the revolution in Egypt. I think that was 2011, but about 10 years ago.
2011, yeah, January, February 2011, yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that they were really fed up about was just not having enough money to get married. I mean, I remember seeing a sign and it just said, I want to get married.
Oh, yeah.
There was a young man holding a sign that just said, I want to get married.
Yeah. There's all sorts of theories around about, which I don't entirely subscribe to, but that this is producing various kinds of frustrations, kind of social and almost sexual almost, but that is having various kinds of political repercussions, the inability to marry.
Oh my God, yeah, that's absolutely, yeah, there's a lot there. And yeah, like, I don't know, I don't know the research on it, but having lots of sexually frustrated men doesn't sound like a good idea.
Yeah, so there's some pieces around that argue that that's really a fundamental force behind various, it's certainly political upheaval and very civil disturbance, political upheaval. I don't know. It strikes me as a little bit too mechanistic and simple, but
Absolutely. I mean, I
there's
think
probably
it's
something
like,
to it. But let me just say, when you ask what makes the Middle East different, one thing that makes it different is there's almost no childbearing outside of formal marriage. Almost
oh, okay.
different. And again, I think there's almost, well, South Asia would have the same, but and to some extent East Asia, but Middle East is so still exclusive about that. The childbearing is something that happens within a formal marriage. I mean, there may well be some births outside of marriage, but they're carefully hidden. And sexual activity before marriage, well, it must be occurring. In pregnancies, maybe they're hardly occurring, or if they are, they're dealt with somehow. It's all quite secretive in a way that you don't find in other parts of the world. But statistically, it's a region where childbearing is entirely a matter of formal marriages. Yeah, if you don't get married, you're not going to have children. So
yeah, it's interesting that in a place where marriage is so highly valued, people are marrying less. So yeah, there's something there.
this is a supreme irony, isn't it? Yeah, it's almost because it's taken so seriously,
Mm-hmm.
become harder. It's almost as it's important. Yeah, it's a deep irony, actually. Yeah, that something is
Yeah,
so highly valued, and
big tension there.
that that you set rules that are so high that they're hard to attain, or harder to attain. Well, I mean, still most people are getting married, of course, but
Right, right.
the bar has been raised. So
Yeah,
so we'll see how that plays out. This does. So it looks like we have a generation of women where many countries, 15-20% may not marry at all, and therefore they won't have children. So what their lives are going to be like after age 40 or 50, it's going to be very different than in the past. Very,
yeah.
very different than Arab society in the past. I mean, almost every woman married and had a few children. So that was just a standard, a fixed thing. So this is kind of unknown territory. Large numbers of women who are later in life without children. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's going to be such a dark. I don't want to imply it's deterministically kind of a dark scenario. It's just well, you call it a new challenge for Middle Eastern societies. So,
Yeah, there's just going to be pros and cons, challenges and opportunities. So.
like I said a while ago, I think there can still be a rich family life if extended family continues to be. So if you don't have a spouse and children yourself, but you have siblings, they have children, so you're an aunt, you're an uncle, you have nieces, you have nephews. There can still be a rich family life.
Oh yeah, I mean, aunts and uncles are so important, I think, and even just adults who are friends of the family, but just to have not just your parents. I think it's healthier to have a variety of caring adults who guide you in different ways, coming from their different, life backgrounds and strengths and weaknesses and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think in Arab societies that those connections have been strong in the past. I said, as evidenced by the high fractions that marry a cousin. So maintaining those connections could be really helpful going forward. So I hope that continues. I think it's a good thing. It seems like it's a good thing. Makes
Very
your
good.
social life richer. So
Yeah, definitely. It's all what you make of it, I guess. And I mean, I definitely think economics need to be looked at and politics and all that stuff. But in terms of just pure potentiality, it's all what you make of it. And people are creative.
So you
that
asked me what makes the region different for a demographer like myself. So I'll mention something else. So we've been talking about marriage, but closely connected is childbearing, fertility as demographers call it. And here what's really interesting about the region. Well, let me step back. So we've had this enormous decline in birth rates and fertility over the last 50, 60 years globally, and a very simple expectation would be that the whole globe's going to converge down to the two-child family, 2 children on average per adults. Well, I mean, you only have to look at the news to know that there are a bunch of countries that are below that. It's called low fertility, sub-replacement fertility. So that's causing some hand-wringing. Actually, in the U.S. now, there's hand-wringing about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's now concerns that we're not having enough children in the U.S. That's kind of around now. That kind of discourse is around. But where the Middle East has departed is in many countries the fertility is not falling down to 2 births per woman, 2-child family. Instead, it's stopping around 3. And this is unexpected, and it's a puzzle for folks like myself, I guess. So notable cases would be Egypt, Algeria, Jordan, Syria. Of course, Syria and Iraq, I was going to say, but of course they have other all the civil and all the civil conflict has been another factor. But Egypt and Algeria are very famous cases where Algeria in the up through the 1990s, the fertility had fallen to 2 births, almost down to 2 births per woman, kind of as the general expectation would be. But very interestingly, after they had a terrible civil war, terrible internal
conflict
in the 1990s, and when they came out of that in the early 2000s, what happened? But the fertility rate went back up, and through the 2000s, it went back up to 3 births per woman again. So there was kind of a rebound. Once life became a bit more normal, they reverted to this somewhat higher level of fertility, as if that's really what they preferred, what they wanted, and having children was difficult during the time of civil conflict. Egypt's the same story. Egypt, the official statistics have never shown a fertility rate below 3 births per woman. And in the period after the so-called revolution, evidence is that the fertility rate went up by about half a birth per woman. So,
oh, wow.
So distinctly above 3, and certainly not anywhere down near 2. So I don't know what the future will be. It's hard to imagine. This, of course, with that kind of fertility rate, you still have a population that's growing. You wonder how long Egypt can accommodate continued population growth. But
it's not
kind of forming. What's that?
Egypt's a very populous country. I think it's the most populous in the Middle East.
It is, yeah. And among other things, you just wonder about fresh water. I mean, the Nile can only do so much.
Yeah.
And of course, Ethiopia is grabbing a larger share of the Nile, it looks like. So
yeah,
there's some real tough issues there.
Yeah, and with climate change is getting hotter, and that puts more pressure on water as well.
But sort of the same story, Jordan. Western Asia is sort of the same story. Kind of not yet do we see signs that they'll settle on the 2-child family, 2 births per woman. So
do you think you'll keep studying that question?
Yeah. Oh no, that's really a high priority kind of question.
Okay.
I wanted to add that in Egypt, I did lead a study. It's already over 10 years old, but we augmented the regular survey data with some more intensive study of people's thinking about having children, what they thought was good and bad about having children, and how many children they wanted. And my colleague at American University of Cairo and Cairo University, Laila El-Zaini, did a really revealing analysis of the data we collected. What she showed was that kind of people recognize the usual arguments why it's good to have just 2 children. It's good for the children, you can invest in them, and it's kind of the parents, the women can work, and they saw kind of all the standard arguments, but they really liked the idea of having more than 2 children. They liked the idea of going on to 3 and 4, and it was for various reasons, but one was something more vague, and I think it's hard for an outsider to understand, that they just felt it's more of a family when you have, like 3 or 4 children rather than just 2. You give your siblings, you give the children more siblings, and that's a benefit, that's a gain for their life. There's a phrase in Arabic about something about brothering or something, that when you have another child, you're giving your existing children another sibling.
Oh, interesting. I need to look that up.
Am I got it right, brothering? I forget what the exact translation is, but the whole notion is that in having a child, you're also giving your children another sibling, and that's enriching their life. So what Laila showed in this analysis published over a decade ago was that Egyptians were not at all persuaded that you should stop with just 2 children. They saw a lot of reasons to have a bigger family. This was before we had this new evidence that, if anything, the fertility rate had gone up a bit. So I think people shouldn't have been surprised. I think it's still a society where if people feel they can afford it, if they feel they can afford it financially, it's a happier life. It's a more satisfying life if you have not just 2, but you have 3, 4 children. It's satisfying in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely, yeah. I think they also have a saying in Egypt, or like a way of talking about children. Like each subsequent child has a special kind of. There's like a saying, like this one is the sweet one, this one is the and then number 4 is that one, number 5. I don't know how long it goes, but they have like.
I hadn't heard that.
I need to find that. I'll ask my friend actually.
So we have a lot of kind of models and theories that place a lot of weight on kind of material considerations, kind of economic calculation, that and at the family level. But I think there are these other kind of things that people value that carry a lot of weight, carry a lot of influence.
It's the worldview factor, the culture factor.
It's a culture factor, and it's kind of culture, values, what you want in your life, and what you kind of value most in your life. And maybe you give a little bit on the material side because you value other things. So
absolutely.
So this is, I have to say, I wish my research could dig deeper into these things. We've had some success, and like I said, we've had some projects where we've tried to dig deeper, but the numbers suggest that there's kind of different valuations of childbearing in Middle Eastern societies than we find in other parts of the world. So still things to understand there. And so definitely, Melinda, this is still an area where I'm great interest in trying to continue to explore.
That's intriguing.
And I'll say for someone like myself, it's great working in this region. There's a lot of I have a lot of colleagues that are they're well trained, that are great to work with. There's some good institutions. My own work in the region started about 25 years ago when the Social Research Center at the American University of Cairo invited me to join a region-wide project on demographic change. But the project was first rate, and the Social Research Center at the American University of Cairo is absolutely top-notch kind of unit, kind of a center.
Good to know.
So there's a lot of great colleagues work with, and they do a lot of data collection, and they do a great job of it. So for someone like myself, there's a lot of satisfactions of conducting research in that region. So.
Oh yeah, it makes all the difference, having really great teamwork and great colleagues, that facilitate global connections so you can get that, the richer sources of information.
I've not, I don't know what your purview is here. I've not had opportunity to work in Iran. And Iran, well, there's of course a whole geopolitical thing there, but their data collections are usually not, their data are usually not available to outsiders. They're kind of outside the usual mix of they're kind of on their own, a bit isolated, at least in the world of demographic research.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And they're, of course, they're a very populous country. They're hugely important. So, and we do have, there's definitely information. Information gets released, gets published, but the opportunity they don't engage in international collaborations, is what I should say, to the same extent as other countries. So I felt really a bit frustrated, or not frustrated, but it's unfortunate. Can't work closely.
Yeah, it creates kind of a empty space there, that's unfortunate, like in terms of understanding the whole region.
Then the other country that's kind of course, its own is Turkey. And there, there's no such problems that I just mentioned. Well, it's changed a bit the last few years, but the opportunity there to collaborate, to work with Turkish scholars has been ample. And they have their own, as you'd expect, their own kind of distinctive demographic history. But,
oh yeah, especially after World War I. I mean, well, the whole Middle East. There were population exchanges, and then in 1947 there was also population shifts in South Asia with, creating Pakistan and stuff like that. And
for myself, they really, someone like myself, the really interesting thing about Turkey now is, as you may know, the current regime, starting almost a decade ago, maybe a bit less, has become quite, well, we call it pro-natalist. They've been urging women to have more children.
Oh, right, that makes sense.
Yeah, and they've been quite out front. They've been saying it repeatedly that Turkish women should go on to have a third child. Don't just stop with two.
Interesting.
We need more Turkish children. It's a very kind of pro-family, pro-natalist. So now the interesting question of so those are pronouncements from on high. And I think there's even been a bit of cutting back on access to contraceptives, maybe, although I don't think that's been a huge, I don't think it's been a huge cutoff. Well, very interesting to see whether these kind of pronouncements from on high have any effect. The data I've seen suggests a little bit of a blip upward in the fertility rate, but nothing like women returning to 3 or more children on average. I don't think they will comply with that that request for kind of patriotic childbearing. But well, it'll be very interesting to follow.
Especially if it's just rhetoric. I mean, if there were like subsidies or something, maybe, I don't know.
They may be doing a little bit financially to help, but I think it's kind of very tiny and at the margin.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they're really depending on.
Oh, we've got.
We're almost out of time.
Yeah. So someone's asking about Palestine. Have you had a chance to look at Palestine in your research?
Palestine's really interesting question. And it's I'd say quite famous in my crowd. So if we go back a few decades, through the 1980s into the 1990s, the fertility rate in Palestine was very high by global standards. There were times when it was like one of the highest rates in the world. And the first intifada, it looks like, if anything, fertility rate even increased a bit in response to that.
Okay.
And
And the first Intifada was in the 90s?
late 1980s or into the early
Okay.
90s. I'm not sure what the precise dates would be, but let's say late 1980s. I think I'm correct on that.
Yeah.
So I think I can't speak with great authority, but I think there was, if not kind of formally written out, kind of informally, there was kind of a thing that it was kind of a contribution to the nation, to the Palestinian nation, to have children. I don't know exactly how explicit this was, but I think there was a perception in among Palestinians that part of their one way to battle with Israel was to be larger demographically. One way you could defeat Israel was to have more Palestinians. The second Intifada, which was late 1990, I think early 2000s. I should have a little confused with my dating. Seemed to have the opposite phenomenon. If anything, that seemed to cause a reduction in fertility. And nowadays, the fertility among Palestinians is down at a pretty low level. It's below 3 births per woman. It's like 2.5 births per woman.
Oh, wow. That's a dramatic downturn.
So, yes, it plunged in the 1990s through to the 2000s. So I say go back 30 years or so, and Palestine was kind of famous in my scholarly crowd for its high fertility rate. That would no longer be the case. That went away. Of course, educational levels very high among Palestinians.
Yes.
Women and men. So a lot of the factors you'd expect would lead to smaller family sizes have applied there. It's a very interesting case study of kind of intertwining of politics and demography. One of the most interesting cases, really.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So,
the intertwining of politics and demography is among the most interesting in the globe, I would say.
Yeah, you mean as a research topic?
Yeah. Well, as an observer, I think many parts of the world there is various connections between the politics and the demography, but it's so out front in many places in the Arab region. I just mentioned Turkey, where the government is taking this active pronatalist stance. More kids is good for Turkey, and Palestine is its own kind of story. Lebanon, where you have kind of suppression of evidence because people don't want to know what the demographics of the country are according to religious group. I mentioned Algeria a while ago, where anyway, there's all through the region. It's quite
and can be an obstacle for research too if you can't get the data.
Yeah, that's another. It does make the data more politicized. Yeah, I would say for someone like myself who works globally, the data situation in the Middle East is unusually politicized. I think I could say that correctly. Again, it's not that you can find politicized. I mean, our country had a lot of politics around our census last year. So,
right.
I mean, these things can be political in all sorts of settings. But through the Middle East, the last 30, 40 years, demographic data has been highly politicized. Yeah, unusually so.
And in different ways in different countries, like you mentioned, Lebanon, and demographics are, it's kind of unique there in terms of government structure, because they're supposed to have actual representatives of the religious, group representations as a part of their government.
Right. So, the parliament is strictly prescribed representation, a number of delegates, number of parliamentarians by religious group. So, but that assumes that was all set a long time ago, and probably the demographic balance has shifted a lot. But the formula for the parliament hasn't shifted. I don't know if they'll get to that. They'll have to probably eventually.
So yeah, I mean, the percentage of Christians versus Muslims has changed since they set up the kind of ratio of the governmental representation. So yeah.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we only have a few more minutes, but do you want to just touch upon how COVID-19 is affecting demographics or demographics research?
Yeah, actually, I don't. It looks to this point, it's COVID has been very light through the Middle East. So, well, there's a question of how it's affected research, how it's affected of the demography. The research, of course, we've all been. I think professionals in the Middle East have been like us throughout the globe. They've been, out of their office. A lot of things have been shut down, but.
Yeah.
Happily, to this point, knock on wood, the COVID has not taken much of a toll through the Middle East. Just hope it doesn't become a scenario like South Asia, where seemed like it wasn't going to take much of a toll, and now it has.
Yeah.
My professional connections in Egypt, the vaccinations are getting out at a very slow pace. So there's a lot of nervousness. But statistically, to this point, it's been a region largely spared of loss of life from COVID. So
that's good.
And I haven't studied why that would be the case. What's kept them somewhat protected?
Complicated, right?
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Things gone right, or maybe it's just there's an accidental aspect to these pandemics too, isn't there? Kind of historical accident. So,
yeah. Absolutely. So, what are your current? Do you have any current projects that are keeping you really busy these days that you'd like to share, or just any other resources you might want to share with our audience, and especially students that might be interested in taking courses with you or knowing more about population research?
Yeah. So, well, I have. I conduct a lot of research that's really a global perspective, and looking at really the last 30, 40 years and figuring out what's happened, or trying to figure out what's happened and where things are going. And for that, there are two regions that are of particular interest to me. One is Sub-Saharan Africa, and because that's kind of that's the remaining region of high levels of fertility and somewhat higher levels of mortality as well. So it's in kind of the international health community, that's a priority region. But also for me, the Middle East, and actually the work I do a lot of work on what's we call issues of unintended fertility, unintended pregnancy. And for that, I'm working closely with a colleague at Cairo University, the person I mentioned before, Laila El-Zaini. We're quite excited. We're developing some new techniques, some new methodologies. So that's satisfying. That's fun. My teaching, I teach graduate courses in fertility research and in methodology. I'm teaching a course this fall in graduate seminar in fertility that will be global, including Europe and North America. So always happy to have students join that course.
So you'll be studying the Middle East and North Africa in the course?
Definitely will enter in.
Okay.
I haven't finished the syllabus yet, so don't know exactly. But
very interesting. Very interesting. Well, thanks so much for taking an hour out of your time and really digging into the unique dimensions of population in the Middle East. I think we could stay a few more minutes if there's something else you want to share, but it has been over an hour now, and we usually keep it to an hour if we can.
Well, no, I thank you, Melinda, for inviting me for this opportunity. I really enjoy talking about all this. Anybody who I'd be happy to follow up. People can find me, can reach me. We can continue talking one-on-one if people have things they want to pursue. So.
Yeah, this is great, and it's definitely given me a lot of food for thought. Like I do outreach to schools and stuff like that, to young people, and we do teacher institutes to train P through 12 teachers on, how to teach about the Middle East. And I really like starting with facts when I'm doing those kind of outreach lectures, because people might not know anything about the Middle East. So I like to start with some facts and statistics and then get people thinking. And one of the types of lectures I do will focus on gender and just putting it in global perspective. So this is all very, very interesting dimension. So yeah, I might be asking you more questions personally.
Oh, I'm happy to continue. I'll say what I said near the very beginning. I mean, the way we work, demographers work, I think most folks would consider it kind of dry statistical exercise. But what we're looking at, it's the stuff we all think is of great importance in life. It's marriages, it's births, it's deaths, it's stuff like that.
Very real.
I mean, what is more salient in people's lives? Their family relationships, fundamental stuff. So,
yeah, really intriguing. And without the accurate numbers, it really leaves you kind of, I don't know, in an area of ambiguity. So it's really important to get the math research done, you know, and it's a lot of work.
It establishes the facts on the ground, and then you dig deeper. So
yeah, and I'm also intrigued by the fact that you're not only studying the numbers, you're studying how to study the numbers with methodology. Is that correct?
Right.
So.
Yeah, numbers it's not always so simple. Right. So anyway, thank you for this opportunity.
You bet. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much, Dr. Casterline. I really enjoyed it. And thanks to the audience. I think we've got all the questions covered. So thanks very much for staying with us for this past little over an hour or so. And yeah, have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.